This is what it looks like. If you can see here, you will notice a small thin line where the wax is actually causing a wet spot. And in this video, we're going to talk about why they happen, can they be fixed, and ways that we can avoid them. But first thing, I want to mention that if your candle has a great scent through and people are loving it, even if you're getting wet spots, you should actually embrace them. And that's because big companies embrace them. So there are two very big companies that we all know that have wet spots on their candles, and they use sneaky ways to hide them. So one of them is this candle right here that you can see in this video, and the other one is this one right there. Now, having wet spots is not an issue with your candles, it's purely aesthetic. Some people tend not to like them and others don't care about them, but they do happen. But why do they happen in the first place? Well, like I said initially, that they're caused by weather fluctuations, that and the wax. I've seen wet spots to happen more with waxes that contain either coconut or paraffin. If you're using something like pure soy, you're not gonna have as many wet spots, but you're gonna face another problem, which is frosting, but that's a topic for another video. Anyways, so the weather conditions of the candle is what causes the wet spot. And this is because the wax has something called glass or jar adhesion. So how good is it at sticking to the jar itself? And this is something that you can ask your supplier for. So some waxes tend to stick more than others, but this doesn't mean that if one wax doesn't, it doesn't mean that it's bad, because wet spots are just aesthetic. And if it's getting wet spots, it could be getting another benefit. For example, I have a wax, which is the M12 by All Seasons Wax Australia, that causes a lot of wet spots, but it is king when it comes to scent through. It can handle 8 to 10% of fragrance load, and the scent is just amazing with the M12. And that's just a balance I'm willing to make. Wet spots are fine, they can be hidden in multiple ways, but the scent is always going to be king. One question that a lot of people tend to ask me though is, can we fix wet spots? The short answer is no. You have to basically change the wax. You have to use something that doesn't have a lot of coconut, a lot of paraffin, something that is more towards dominant soy that will help you decrease your wet spots. But again, it's the weather environment that actually affects whether your candle is going to have wet spots or not. Now, the good news is we can do ways to minimize them, but not get rid of them completely. One of the ways is we have to try to pour closest to the room temperature as possible and keep the jar warm or hot while pouring. And there's two ways in which you can do that. You can either use a heat gun, just like this one, to basically heat the jar, or you can put them in the oven for like 2 minutes to get them up to temperature, and then you can pour right after that. But based on my experience, if you pour the candle today and it was perfect, there was no wet spots, there were no issues. But then you come the next day and the weather changed. Let's say you open the window, you open the door, whatever it was. The wet spots will show up. And they might even disappear later down the line. The candle tends to do things like this on its own. And the third way of actually trying to minimize them is to actually pour the wax into the jars, in the boxes that they came in. So by doing that, you're actually controlling how much draft and air can be in contact with the wax while it's drying or while it's curing actually, and this will help you minimize the wet spots. But again, one thing is for sure, that once the candle is going to be removed from the box, which eventually it will be again in contact with different weather conditions, and then the wet spots will show, and that's basically, it's inevitable. The fourth way to avoid wet spots is basically by copying what big companies do. They put a label all around the jar, or they use a colored jar just like this one. If you have a colored jar, there's no way to see from the insides, and then the wet spots will not be a problem anymore. And then you will get the creamy finishes that you get with waxes that give you wet spots and still have a great candle with no issues whatsoever. So yeah, you can either cover it all the way or use a colored jar. And yeah, that's basically it as far as wet spots are concerned. Again, if you're getting them, but you have a good scent, that's fine. Embrace the wet spots, scent is king. If they're bothering you, then you have to change the type of wax that you're using, or basically like just what I just said, cover it or just use a fully colored jar. So yeah, anyways, that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.